is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it? I'm the Doctor. Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
Small off-duty Czechoslovakian traffic warden.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Only joking.
I'm the Doctor.
So what is it?
I'm the Doctor.
Alright dudes, it's time for another episode of It's Time to Rewind. I'm known as Bubbawheat. Not the Bubbawheat, not first name Bubba, last name Wheat, just Bubbawheat. This season is Red Who, where I am covering British sci-fi like Red Dwarf and Doctor Who. And joining me 3 million years in the future, once again, via the TARDIS, is my guest, Lackey. How are you doing today?
Unfortunately, I cannot call you at exactly 10 seconds to midnight.
Well, darn, that ruins my New Year's Eve plans.
Darn.
And we are still in the main section of this season with the 2022 New Year's Eve special, Eve of the Daleks, with the 13th Doctor Jodie Whittaker. And on this episode, we are covering the fifth loop that starts at 35 minutes even, with Dan being glad they're alive and the Doctor leading them to the reception via the stairs, and ends at 41 minutes and 44 seconds, with all 5 of the characters in this episode being exterminated by Daleks. Before we jump into it, I've talked to you several times. I don't remember, have we talked about the Jodie Whittaker, the Chibnall era very much yet?
I have not discussed the Chibnall era much with you, I don't think.
So what's your thoughts? I know like the common reception that I've been hearing is that Jodie Whittaker is great, but Chibnall is not so great, and the writing is kind of the weakest part of Jodie Whittaker's era.
I'm not going to disagree with that in any way, shape, or form. I think Jodie Whittaker is a great actress. I think the problem with Chris Chibnall is that Chris Chibnall, I will give Chris Chibnall this. He is very good at writing like procedural type stuff. Like the solo thing that he did before becoming Doctor Who showrunner was Broadchurch, which Jodie Whittaker was the main character on, and also starred like a bunch of other Doctor Who people like David Tennant and Arthur Darvill. And that was, at least the first season was really, really good. I think it kind of went off the rails a little bit the second and third season. And he, from what I recall of some of the other stuff I've seen of his, there was a, I think late 2000s, early 2010s, there was a show called Life on Mars, which was a sort of, it was science fiction-y in the sense that, it took a modern day cop played by John Sim, who is the Harold Saxon master in Doctor Who, the modern Doctor Who, and it took him back to like the early 70s. And Chris Chibnall was a staff writer on that, and I seem to recall his episodes of that were pretty good. Doctor Who, and Doctor Who related stuff, I believe I've always felt he is a very weak writer, for that. He was the head writer for the first 2 series of Torchwood, which were terrible. I can understand liking them kind of in a sort of fluff sort of way, but I can't imagine, there's no argument I can imagine anybody ever making that that they were actually good TV. Most of his episodes of Doctor Who during the Davies and Moffat era, there were 1 or 2 I thought were decent. I liked the Silurian 2-parter from Matt Smith's first season. I liked Dinosaurs on a Spaceship. I didn't think either of them were perfect, but I thought they were fun.
Yeah, I haven't been paying attention to the writer's credit as I've been going through, but I did recently watch the Power of Three, the one with the slow cube invasion.
Yeah.
And somebody pointed out that was written by Chibnall, and I thought that was a weak episode. But I did watch, the dinosaurs in the spaceship, just before that, and I thought that was a really strong episode.
But I don't think science fiction is what he does well. There is a lot of stuff, a lot of behind the scenes stuff that I can cite here. I'm not going to. I think I've mentioned it kind of like off the record on our Discord server. But it's stuff that I don't necessarily want to put out into the ether because they're rumors. They're not something I've ever substantiated. So I don't want to try to pass this stuff off as if as if it's like the gospel truth, because I just don't know. What I will say is that I've heard a number of, after saying I will not spread rumors, I'm about to spread rumors. I will simply leave it as my understanding is that I've heard a number of rumors that state that he took on the role of showrunner very reluctantly. I think that the problem with Doctor Who kind of at this point is that he's doing stuff that really kind of doesn't say anything, except when it's basically getting its big lesson stick and bashing you over the head with it. I don't think he's very good there. So if you've been listening to the podcast I do with Jason Soto, if you listen From Inner Time, there is a consistent observation. It's not 100% a criticism. And I will say that I understand, because I say I understand this is how we do television now, which is that Doctor Who, modern Doctor Who, as it has existed since 2005, isn't really about plot. It is very much a show that most episodes are a series of emotional set pieces with action or running around as connective tissue. And like I said, I prefer the more plot-oriented structures of the old show. And I understand this is kind of how you make any sort of new genre television. For the most part, it's not something that I mind, except for the point where I think that, all of this, that it's empty, emotional, manipulative spectacle, and there's no character, there's nothing that I can really care about. And unfortunately, that's the Chris Chibnall era. I think most of, as game as the actors are, the lead actors, Jodie Whittaker, Mandip Gill-Jazz, Tosin Cole as Ryan, Bradley Walsh as Graham, and John Bishop as Dan, there's not really a whole lot you can do. Like, my criticism of Dan, who is in this episode, is that Chris Chibnall seems to think being from Liverpool is a personality trait. That was a running joke when on From Inner Time when Jason and I were covering the Flux season. I was like, "Hey, is Dan from Liverpool?" I'm not really clear on it, and even noticed that in this particular chunk of the time loop, even has a little bit of that when he calls Yaz Sheffield. Apparently, there's this sort of pride thing in Britain where people will nickname people after where they're from.
Yeah, and my last guest, Nam McGowan, he's from Liverpool, and he works in Manchester, and he spent a little bit of time talking about the Liverpool and Manchester feud because this storage facilities in Manchester, and Dan has a line in at the beginning where he basically is upset that they're in Manchester. He gives kind of he's like, oh, Manchester.
Yeah, and I mean, it's not something that I have completely no sympathy with. As a Chicagoan, and you used to live in the Chicago area as well. You have, I'm sure, both of us have shown, at least I have thrown many a shade against, Wisconsinites over the years.
Mhm.
But it's just, there's just the characterization isn't there. The writing chops aren't there. There is, here's me spreading a rumor. There's, and this is something I only just discovered today. I've heard that Chris Chibnall, when casting Jodie Whittaker, he initially told her, I want a fresh take on the Doctor. Don't go back. She wasn't really a Doctor Who fan. Don't go back and watch any previous Doctors, which is like, kind of the exact opposite of what Moffat did when casting Matt Smith, who similarly, wasn't really familiar with Doctor Who. He told Moffat gave Matt Smith a number of here's some episodes you might want to check out. Here are some Doctors specifically you might be interested in, and I think we even mentioned, because I know you did Tomb of the Cybermen, how Matt Smith latched onto Tomb of the Cybermen as one thing that he wanted to emulate. And I get where Chris Chibnall might have been coming from if this is a true story, to get a fresh take, but the kind of the problem is that, number one, he doesn't write a fresh take on the Doctor. He writes the Doctor very generically,
Mhm.
and in particular, once you get into the second Whittaker season, so much of it is in dialogue with Doctor Who's past. So, I mean, there's the whole Timeless Child arc. He brings back the Daleks, he brings back the Cybermen, he brings back the Jadoon and all that. And so you get this sort of performance from Jodie Whittaker where, she's doing the best she can with the tools she's been given to perform the role, but there's a particular scene here in this particular time loop where 13 is giving the fam, quote unquote, plus what are their names?
Sarah and Nick.
Sarah and Nick, where she's giving them this big pep talk, about we're gonna have to do this again. We're gonna make mistakes, we're gonna fail, we're gonna die, we're gonna go to the beginning of the next loop, and we're gonna make different mistakes. We're gonna fail again, but we're gonna fail better. And
yeah, that's really, in a way, I feel like that's really her only big scene in this episode is that little speech. The rest of it is her just kind of running around and being reacting to everything that's going on around her, rather than being an active main character.
Right, and on top of that, in you put this in the hands of any other new series Doctor. I mean, you can very much compare this to, David Tennant's scene in, I think it's Voyage of the Damned. I'm a Time Lord. I'm from the constellation Casturbius. I'm 1,000 years old. I'm going to save you. And it's like, Matt Smith would have done the same thing. He would have made it kind of like a centerpiece of the episode. Same thing with Capaldi. Same thing with with Eccleston. And Whittaker almost kind of tosses it off, nonchalantly. There's just no real weight to the way she delivers those lines.
Yeah, it's I can see how it can be viewed as, a more passive rather than active, even though in that moment it is supposed to be like this rousing. Okay, let's go get him next time. It's like it's kind of, it almost reminds me, and this is kind of I guess timely, but also maybe not the best choice. But watched the first couple episodes of Win or Lose on Disney Plus, and
Uh-huh.
that's kind of like, it's not really a time loop, but it is, it's the same events from different characters' perspectives, and it's centered around like a kids softball tournament. And the first episode is the coach's daughter, who's the worst player on the team, and there's this montage of her dad, like tapping her head and say, "You'll get him next time. You'll get him next time. You'll get him next
Uh-huh.
time." And that's kind of what this moment and especially that speech really reminds me of. It's like, we'll get him next time. It's like we're just gonna give up this time, but we'll get him next time.
Right. And just I could not bring myself. I tried to want to watch this episode again all the way through, and I couldn't bring myself to do it. So I only just rewatched that one loop. But it really does. I think that loop really kind of does nail to me why I feel like Jodie is probably the worst. She and Colin Baker were kind of like the worst served actors in the role. They did the best they could with some very shoddy material. And whereas, the difference is, and we, I was on the Colin Baker one as well when you did, Resurrection of the Daleks. And the thing is about, that era is that at least Colin Baker is interesting to watch in the ways he goes over the top. It does kind of result in the fact that everybody is going over the top, because that's the only way you can keep up and kind of not get steamrolled in a Colin Baker story. But here it's just like everybody is, I really want to be, well disposed to these actors, but it's just like, other than Aisling B as Sarah, like none of them really has a lot to work with.
And Ashlyn is really kind of front and center. It's as my favorite character in this episode. I mean, yeah, I didn't count, but I wouldn't be surprised if Yaz has like less than a dozen lines this entire episode.
Right. And it's just kind of, I think, an overall problem here. Every character is underwritten. These characters really just kind of slide off your brain like the minute the episode's done, except for, like I said, the Aisling B character. She's like the one, I think, that comes out of this episode looking the best, not because Sarah is all that particularly fascinating or well written, but the Doctor Who commentator Elizabeth Sandifer makes a real good point here. Aisling B is a professional comedian. She's a comedic actor, and what you can see a lot in comedy is you get great comedians who can sell a great joke. That's not the hallmark of a great comedian. A great comedian is a comedian who can sell a bad joke. And what Elizabeth Sandifer says about this is that Aisling B actually manages something that's even more remarkable. She manages to basically turn a complete lack of comedy into comedy.
Yeah, I mean, her character is kind of terrible in a lot of ways, but she makes her endearing at the same time.
Right. And it's not something, I think, the other end, I don't want to put him down, because I think, like I said, I think he's doing the best with a character that's underwritten. And he does bring a certain amount of likability, but a Johnny Salmon as Nick, just, it's not there. The characterization is not there. I think one of the things that really occurs to me when I'm watching like late period Jodie Whittaker is how much I feel I'm not watching like the actual characters. I'm watching a bunch of actors walk around and say lines.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and jump into the episode proper, and at the start, which this is kind of a repeat of the the previous loop where we start off with the Doctor and crew, and Dan is happy that they're back because he had just sacrificed himself early in the loop last time around, and so he's glad that they're back. And this time they go head off towards reception via the stairs instead of the 5th floor via the lift like they did last time. And then we cut almost immediately, like just a few seconds later, to Sarah, and we get the another like time loop marker where she immediately looks at her phone and confirms that we're starting at 5 minutes to midnight. So this is again the ticking clock and the shrinking, the rising stakes. That's this time we only have 5 minutes instead of 6 minutes that we did last time. Which I kind of like. I think Chris Chibnall does a good job in terms of the pacing and the flow of information and the ticking clock and the rising level of danger with the increasing number of Daleks and the various loops. I think in those terms he does pretty good in this episode.
Yeah, it's structurally, this is one of his more competent episodes where he's able to kind of keep that rising action coming. And a lot of that is just structural. He's hit upon, I am actually going to praise him on this one. He's hit upon the idea of doing a time loop with Daleks, which, that's not I'm not going to say that's writing in any way, shape, or form is easy to do. I have struggled with it my entire life, but it's a fairly obvious combo, structurally speaking, in that you can, and he also cuts down that time loop by 1 minute every loop, which helps give it an additional sense of tension and rising stakes. But getting that sort of thing, the sort of structure going where the further you get, the more loops you are, the closer you are to midnight, you have the Daleks, and you have more Daleks every iteration. Mm-hmm. And that is if he uses that fairly effectively here to keep the tension going.
Yeah, and this one, in the last loop we went from 1 Dalek to 2 Daleks, and this one we go from 2 to 5. Right. Because if we get, before we get there, we have this, kind of this early meetup with the Doctor and Co. and Sarah, and we get this like little bit of argument. Why didn't you meet up with it? Like you didn't follow the plan. Where in the last loop, Sarah kind of threw the Doctor under the bus, and it's like, we're getting ourselves out, even though that didn't end up working. And at this time, we do also kind of get a little bit more of the build-up in the Sarah and Nick relationship, where, starting off, it was very much like something that didn't exist. And the last episode we had the last loop, I should say, and we had the confessional where Sarah admitted to not going up and saving Nick, like she had told him in the 3rd loop, and Nick confesses that he's had this crush on her. And so now we have Sarah, softening even much more, and she realizes that he's about to die up by his storage unit, and she calls him a weirdo, like really weird. And again, that's credit to Ashlyn that she is able to kind of throw shade at him, but also have it come around where she's like, but he's got a good heart, and talks about how her friend Lauren says that good-hearted weirdos, those are the keepers.
Yeah, that's so looking at the Wikipedia page for Eve of the Daleks, Chris Chibnall had kind of 2 points that he was in mind when he was writing this. The first thing is he wanted to do a bottle episode. He wanted to do an episode whose action was restricted to one location. And the second thing that he had in mind to focus on when he wrote this beyond the time loop, romantic comedy. And that the romantic aspect I tend to feel is one of the weakest aspects of the episode, partially because Nick just, like, there's good weird and there's bad weird. And Nick, everything in like the first half of the episode about we learn about Nick really kind of, it's the grammar that tells us that Nick is the bad kind of weird.
Yeah.
And it just, between that and the fact that I just don't think that Johnny Salmon and Aisling B have a whole lot of chemistry with each other. It's just, now this is kind of the thing, an interesting thing that I've sort of discussed on our Discord server, which is that generally speaking, in any sort of narrative, like almost as high as 95% of the time, the if there's a romantic subplot, it's like one of the things I'm least interested in. Just for whatever reason. So foregrounding something like that, you know, which is not a thing I'm really all that interested in anyway. I mean, I accept it's going to be there, but I just don't think I don't think the script pulls it off. I don't think the characters really gel together. I think that Sarah is a little bit, the way that these characters are written at the beginning, Sarah is a little bit too misanthropic. Nick is just straight up creepy. And it's just, I mean, now sexual politics under Doctor Who is always a dodgy thing. You know, Stephen Moffat in particular likes to have his romantic subplots, you know, based around the guy who just, you know, just harangues and harangues and harangues and harangues the woman until she, you know, submits to marry him.
Yeah, I you know, for my part, I will say that I can definitely see where you're coming from, but I think that their relationship, and especially the Nick character, works a bit better from my perspective. Like I'm much softer on Nick than you are. Although I do agree that at the beginning he is very much, you know, they do very much paint him as the creepy kind of weird. But I think that he grows on me a lot more than he grew on you.
Yeah, he just, for whatever reason, he just doesn't grow on me.
Yeah, and then we also have this kind of you know, slight parallel, because we do have you know, we don't get to it fully here, but we do get a, you know, kind of a prequel in this scene, is that the with the Doctor and Yaz relationship, you know, coming to light. You know, that it's something that, you know, I'm not familiar with outside of this episode, but I definitely, you know, just based on what I see in this episode, is kind of, you know, a long-running will they, won't they relationship between the Doctor and Yaz and the previous... No, not even?
No. This is... I cannot recall whether they started, and I'm sorry for interrupting you, I cannot recall whether they started to tease us towards the end of Flux, or if this is the first time it came up. But literally, it is literally this late in the Jodie Whittaker tenure that the series is, her tenure is almost over when they start actually even, they don't, it's one of those things, and again, this is a thing where I'm mentioning something that may or may not be true. What I've heard is that Chris Chibnall did not have a 13 Yaz ship in mind when he started it. This is something that came in fandom. You started seeing this phrase, Phasmin, 13th Yasmin, on
like
Twitter and stuff.
Like the Destiel relationship and
Right. You know, and very much towards the end, Chris Chibnall decided, okay, that's not a bad idea. Let's do something. Let's mention it in the show. But that's the thing. For almost everybody I've talked to, it seems to come, mentioning on the show seems to come out of nowhere. There's no like kind of developing thing in their relationship. There's this episode, and then in the, I hate to do the spoilers, but I think it's in the next episode, the special after this Legend of the Sea Devils. It's resolved by the Doctor sitting Yaz down and saying, "Yeah, I don't date. It's too hard. You lose people. If I did date, it would be you. Maybe this is a date. I'm not really dating," and that's it.
That kind of, it blows my mind a little bit, just based on how it's treated in this episode, because we get this moment where, right after the line, "Good-hearted weirdos, those are the keepers," and then Yaz gives the Doctor a bit of a look, and then the Doctor looks back and says, "What?" And then Dan gives them both kind of a side eye, like he knows what's been going on.
Right. Which goes back to, I think, Dan noticed, because there's that whole, I don't remember her name, but when he's introduced in Flux, there's kind of like a sort of will they, won't they thing that he's got going with a side character who I think only shows up in 3 episodes.
Yeah, and then after that we get a bit more of the time loop explanation, and then I do think that this is a little bit of one of the weak points of this episode, because I feel like Chibnall gives characters a lot of extra knowledge that they shouldn't have, and in this one, Sarah somehow knows that Nick died between 5 and 6 minutes till midnight, or between 5 and 4 minutes till midnight. And so here she theorizes that if he dies in this first minute, and if he's dead before it hits 4 minutes to midnight, then he won't be resurrected the next time around because he will have already been dead.
That didn't bug me particularly.
And again, it's one of those things where it didn't bug me whenever I first watched it, but because I'm breaking it down the way I am, it's something that I've definitely been noticing a lot more whenever you're looking at it. It's the much more minute detail.
Right. It's one of those things where I think, and this is another negative hallmark of the Chibnall era, which is that I think a lot of this stuff doesn't really hold up when you start to break it down. I think a lot of it's just surface level stuff. Everything is entirely on the surface. There's no depth. There's no, subtext to anything. Except when, like I said, Chibnall comes up to you with his, subtext stick and starts hitting you over the head. It didn't bug me here because it's like, I have this kind of interesting kind of view of Doctor Who, which is I look at Doctor Who as a show which to me the appeal of Doctor Who is that every episode you get to visit a different genre. You get to visit a different set of genre tropes. You get to visit a different set of genre conventions. So once I think once it occurs to Sarah, oh, I'm in a time loop and it keeps getting shorter, it doesn't bug me on a surface level that she makes that conclusion, because she's got to come to that conclusion somehow. She's got to come to that conclusion before Nick dies permanently, and we only have an hour to work with.
Yeah, that also kind of reminds me, going back to the third loop, the beginning of the third loop, whenever Doctor and Co. appear, and the Doctor and Yaz both say, "We're in a time loop," and Dan says, "Groundhog Day," and
right,
and he says, "Same difference." Right,
and that's kind of part and parcel with doing genre, anything like genre storytelling these days. We're in this sort of postmodern phase where, everything, to an extent, not everything has to be Scream, but you're in a story, you're in a genre story, you are, a character is situated enough understanding the popular culture implications. If you have an episode of a show with zombies in it, then you have
They have genre
understand
awareness.
Right. That's what I'm getting at. The genre awareness. Everybody's aware that they're in an episode, that they're in a zombie story. And, zombie, certain things are going to happen. You have to watch for the person who gets bit by the zombie and doesn't tell anybody and so forth. And that's just basically the same thing here. Everybody knows that they're basically in a combination of Groundhog Day and whatever you want to use as your touchstone for action horror. Like, everybody understands that they're in a cross between, Groundhog Day and Predator. And it's so it doesn't, and like I said, when you've got to have them figure that out at get that piece of knowledge at some point, and you've only got X number of minutes to tell the story, I'm a bit forgiving of that.
Yeah,
but then again, I'm not going over this the way you are. I mean, the what you're doing with this is you're going over this with a fine-tooth comb, and that's how you're going to see it.
Yeah, and I said it before. I know, it sounds like you are not super high on this episode, but for me, I still enjoy. Well, I mean, I'm only halfway through in terms of recording, going through this loop by loop, but I'm still pretty high on this episode. I think this is one of the better episodes that I've seen, and I enjoy it. And I think part of that is because it's a time loop, and I'm predicated towards the time loop elements. Clearly, I mean that's why I'm doing this podcast.
Exactly. This is something you're predisposed to be interested in, be a little bit more engaged in, just like other than just like a random adventure somewhere. And I know I'm being kind of down on this episode. I think it's a very flawed episode. It is, I do feel, one of the better Chibnall era episodes. I would put it, if I were to look at the Chibnall era, not that there's all that many episodes in the Chibnall era. I don't think there's much more than 30. This is, Eve the Daleks stands a good chance of being like lower in the top 5. It's not. I think there are 2 or 3 really good episodes. Like Demons of the Punjab is really good. Despite some issues with both of them, I do really like It Takes You Away and Nikola Tesla. But really, and that I think is just kind of like a sorry state of affairs for the Jodie Whittaker era. The Eve of the Daleks is a competently structured and written episode. It's not. I think if you were to stick it in,
this episode was adequate.
it was adequate. I remember having a discussion about with Carl from our podcast group about one of the Nishudi Gatwa episodes. I think it was 73 Yards. And what we both said was that was an adequate episode. But we said after the Jodie Whittaker era, this would have been one of like the highlights of the Jodie Whittaker era. About that particular episode. So the thing about this is that it's adequate, but adequate is well above the average for the Chibnall era, unfortunately. But it's competently structured. It's fairly, Aisling B really steals the show here.
Yeah. And she is kind of prominently featured. I've said before that this episode is really like the Sarah and Nick episode with the Doctor as the supporting character.
Right. But she, I think, really carries the episode and does it well. It's got Daleks in it. It's really hard to mess up Daleks, although Lord knows it has been done.
Yeah, and then jumping into the Nick part of the episode, which again, well, actually, one other thing that I was going to say, back in the reception, is that she spends 2 minutes talking about how Nick dies in the first minute.
Uh-huh.
And I mean, it works because Nick, we kind of jump back, and this is a 5-minute loop, but the scene is over 6 minutes long, which and I've said before that makes it works because we're jumping between characters, and so we're getting some overlapping time. So even though it's 6 minutes of screen time, it makes sense that it's only 5 minutes of characters' time, because we're getting some overlapping action, because we're
Right.
jumping back to the beginning of the loop again, but we're seeing it from Nick's perspective, and so
Right.
that adds a couple minutes, and then we see him survive himself, so that kind of answers the question of is he going to die? But and just like in the last loop where we had Dan just escaping the Dalek by circling around him, we have Nick destroying 2 Daleks by ducking,
Uh-huh.
which it kind of showcases the silliness of the Daleks, even though I think before those two scenes, this episode did a good job of showing the Daleks as a credible and dangerous threat to the characters.
The Daleks are it's really interesting looking at the Daleks. The Daleks are they're like the definitive Doctor Who monster, and like all Doctor Who monsters, they're silly to a very very real extent. Doctor Who, when it comes to a lot of these older monsters, I think Doctor Who works best when it tries to take them a little bit more seriously, and tries to kind of emphasize how they can be menacing. And I think this episode is very well directed. It uses a lot of smoke. I think if I recall correctly, it shoots the Daleks from slightly under, so they look taller and more looming. It's really kind of easy to get Daleks. They look ridiculous. Aim for the eyepiece. They can't climb stairs. This really gets, and approaching it depending on the monster, like the Santarans. I don't think that the new show really serves the Santarans well by constantly referencing the fact that their heads look like potatoes. I mean, yes, their heads look like potatoes. Yes, we get that. We don't need to mention that every single episode.
Yeah, and I ended up, first being introduced to the Santarans through the Sarah Jane adventures, and then and then that's that's more kid focused, and that really, from my perspective, really toned them down in terms of a threat, because they are, in theory, they're up there with Daleks, Cybermen, Santarans, but from my perspective, they were defeated by an old woman and 3 kids.
The Santarans, I mean, if you actually look at the original show, there's really only one good Santaran episode, one good Santaran story, and that's the one that introduces them. That's kind of the problem, is that they are kind of a rubbish monster to begin with. They're not. I think they can have like the thematic heft of a Dalek or a Cyberman if you actually want to put the work into it. They're the military. They're the military principle that everything is a battle to be fought writ large.
They're kind of like Klingons, only only more militaristic.
That's not I think I even made that. Oh God, I remember mentioning that when I was doing my rewatch last year, when I rewatched all of New Who, and there was one monster that I was just like, this monster is basically, and I might have been the Santarans, but this monster is basically what people who don't watch Star Trek think Klingons are all the time. And I can say that as a person who doesn't watch much Star Trek.
Yeah, and then we also get, kind of another instance of, what I think is characters responding to things that they shouldn't really know, where Nick, after he survives the two Daleks, he says, he's like relieved, and he says, now I can make it until midnight, and that's kind of Nick responding to something that Sarah said in the completely other room that he wouldn't have been, that he wouldn't have heard. But it's like him responding to what she just said.
Yeah, this script needed another editing pass to get all the inconsistencies out. That's all I really. I think that's fairly obvious.
Yeah, and then like the other big inconsistency, we get this, this conversation with all five of them, and then, we kind of already talked about this rousing speech that we get here at the tail end of this loop, and then her mom calls, and it's like right near the end. But in all the previous loops, it's been pretty consistent where her mom calls at 4 minutes to midnight, which if that followed through in this loop, then she should have called 1 minute into the episode. Or, I mean, one minute into the scene.
I didn't notice that. I don't know. It's yeah, this is not a criticism. You're putting more thought into a lot of this than I think either I do, and to be honest, than Chris Chibnall did.
And of course, I mean that's what this format of podcast is putting way more thought into something. It's
all good.
Yeah, and then we also get the the whole start of the plan. It's like, can you get your mom to call 10 seconds to midnight? And the response is, if our lives are dependent on my mom calling at a time that I want her to, then we're all dead.
Yeah, I thought that was actually one of the funnier bits. I one of my favorite things about this episode is kind of like the relationship between Sarah and her mom, who is a character we never see. I don't even think we ever hear her voice.
No, she plays. This is like the only loop where she doesn't get a voice, and we do see like through the phone screen, like she's always through the phones, and yeah, I believe it's we only see her through the phone screen because they're doing video chat. And
but I like that.
Well, I was told in the last episode that she, in terms of her pedigree, she's well known for Father Ted, which is a popular British sitcom, but one that I have not seen, and I think a lot of American people probably haven't seen unless they're Britcom files.
Yeah, Father Ted it's the same guy that created IT Crowd. What I will say, but to go back to the relationship between Sarah and her mom, I loved there's a line that is I think very early on in the episode that I thought was actually hilarious, which is Sarah telling her mom, call me at midnight, and her mom is like, no, I won't be able to get through, the lines will be busy, and Sarah's like, no, they won't be busy because it's not 1973.
Yeah, I love that relationship between her and her mom. It's such a great. Jeff is the one character that we never see or hear.
Jeff is the character we never see. Yeah, I thought they did a fairly good job of drawing. In many ways, I think Sarah's mom and Jeff. I think in many ways they're better drawn characters than say Sarah and Nick, to be honest. Not in terms of what the actors bring to the character, but in terms of writing.
Yeah, we see so much of their personalities just through what we don't see. Like especially Jeff. Like Jeff has no lines and he's not on screen, but he is very much a very present character in this episode.
like within the first 2 or 3 things we know about Jeff, he's drawn so deftly in dialogue, and a lot of this is I'm saying something good about Chibnall's writing, which is mark this day. This is a landmark in my life. The one time I had anything good to say about Chibnall's writing of Doctor Who. I think he does a very good job of kind of like deftly sketching out a character that we never see, we never meet. And again, Aisling Bea's delivery is kind of like the icing on the cake there.
Yeah, and then we get the introduction of 3 more. Well, we get the kind of the end of the Doctor's rousing speech, and all 5 of the the other 4 characters all they say deal to this this multi-loop plan that she's proposing here at this moment. And then the 3 Daleks show up and kill all 5 of them at once. And even though this is, it's a mass death scene, but this kind of signifies the change in the episode. That this is like the turn where, from this point on, it's like they have a plan, and this is like the hopeful turn in this episode.
Uh-huh. Yeah, definitely.
And that's and then again it ends, and it I think visually and like you said, there is definitely the low angle shot of the Daleks where we're looking up at the Daleks, and we're looking kind of down at the 5 of the human and the Doctor characters. That's
right.
But or actually, I think it's looking at it, it's more straight on, but it is kind of this head to head where we have the 3 Daleks in the V, and then we have the 5 of them in this V formation as well. So it's like they're facing off in this moment.
Right. The way the eye lines are done, in this shot, and also the other thing I want to mention here is the new Dalek guns, where like those kind of repetitive, almost like Gatling or Tommy gun that send out instead of sending out 1 bolt, they send like a bunch of bolts in succession, like a machine gun or an assault rifle, which I don't think is an entirely necessary thing. From the standpoint of making Daleks cool, I don't think it's 100% necessary, but it's a good visual.
Yeah, and one thing that I haven't really talked about yet, but I just happened to notice it's where I have the shot paused, but with the 3 Daleks, we do see like the Christmas tree off to the side, which I think that's kind of a nice touch, and it makes sense in this context because it's New Year's Eve, and I think the generally accepted practice is that you don't take Christmas decorations down until New Year's Day.
Uh-huh. Oh, most people I know leave them up until well after New Year's.
Yeah, that too. But yeah, it is kind of nice to it makes sense that we're still seeing Christmas decorations, even though this is a New Year's special, since we didn't get a Christmas special this time around.
Uh-huh.
And then that wraps up this loop. Do you have anything else to say about this loop or this episode?
Yeah, actually. Spoiler for the end of the episode. Carl from the very first Jodie Whittaker episode has a cameo at the end of this episode, and it's just the most bizarre cameo in the sense that I can't imagine a single person going, yeah, Carl's back, because the entire, part of the thing is that the entire point, I shouldn't say the entire point, but about half the point of Jodie Whittaker's first episode is just basically how useless Carl is. And it's not like they ever brought him up. This is like the first time they brought him up since then, so it's like he's a forgettable, not particularly well he's just not a very memorable character, and bringing him back for like 2 seconds, giving him one line, and this just seemed like, what? Shit, Chris Chibnall has a very weird sense of fan service.
Yeah, and as someone that hadn't seen that episode, I didn't even clock that was,
Right.
that was supposed to be a callback. He just seemed like an insignificant extra.
Actually, since I'll ask you this, did it seem to you like there was any significance to the character at all, or did you just feel like they just threw someone in there as an outside observer for one line? Like, did you get like the sense that guy, I should know that guy, but I don't because I haven't watched the rest of the Jodie Whittaker stuff, or did you just think he was just basically a random character?
I don't even I haven't rewatched to the end of the episode in a while. I don't even he's the cab driver.
I think so. Yeah, I have to go back and remember.
Yeah, that's the only other character that I remember, existing. But yeah, he didn't strike me. He seemed very forgettable to me.
It's just one of those things because like a couple months ago we did at Rabbit Hole, we did a Pictures and Conversations episode about a book called Paradox Bound, which is a time travel book, a novel about time travel, and there's loads of it is just pop culture reference, and there are 2 very specific Doctor Who references in it, one of which you're really not going to get unless you're somebody who knows a lot about classic Doctor Who lore. And the other one is basically, it's a reference that if you know anything about Doctor Who, if you've heard anything about Doctor Who, even if you've never seen it, there's a good chance that you'll just recognize it as a Doctor Who reference. But I was having a discussion with Lisa about that second one, and it's you'll either get it, or he puts so much emphasis on it that if you don't get it, you should at least get this feeling of that's a reference to something, but I don't know what it is, because he basically draws a big circle around it. And that's kind of, if I was wondering if that's how Carl's cameo felt to you.
Yeah, like I said, before you even mentioned him, I didn't even remember another character. And,
Gotcha.
I had to think, and it's oh yeah, I guess there were, whenever they get in the cab, the cab driver does have a line.
Yeah. All right. That's probably all I've got to say about it.
All right. Well, thank you for coming back and joining me once again. Unless I kind of try to wrangle you into my Sarah Jane Adventures episode, if I can't find another guest, this is probably your last time this season.
If you want somebody to talk about Sarah Jane, I've got the episodes, so I'm more than happy to discuss them.
Yeah, because I don't know why, but for some reason this season as a whole has been kind of difficult to find guests in the back half of this season, going through some of the spin-offs and additional and this episode specifically too. I think part of that is kind of telling for the Jodie Whittaker Chibnall era, that it's hard to find people that to discuss this one.
Yeah, it really isn't well regarded within fandom. I'm sure that there are people who enjoy it. I watched it. I watched it, most of it. There were episodes I missed, which is that's I think the damning thing about it. There were episodes that I missed that. And a lot of it was because I had other things going on in my life, but that is, I think, this is kind of like my favorite thing of all time, and the fact that it was less essential to me during this particular era. I think that kind of says it all, at least as far as, my attitude towards it.
Yeah, and I also feel like with especially with long running TV shows, you do have the standard kind of drop in quality that almost all long running TV shows have, but I feel like there's also a bit of an anti recency bias where the most recent season is almost always considered like the worst and the less well regarded, and then people are always like, oh, but the previous, the seasons that I grew up with, that I started are the best ones, and
Right.
these are not as good. And then 10 years later, that's not always, sometimes it is just a standard drop in quality in the later seasons, but I think sometimes there is a bit of a shift.
Sometimes, it depends. On the one hand, although I think a lot of this is Filoni, you do have, I think, a situation where people are kind of reappraising the Star Wars prequels on their own terms and saying, well, maybe they're not great, but they have things in there that we like. On the other hand, over the last 15 years, I still find very, very, very few people who will defend any season of the Simpsons past the turn of the millennium.
Yeah. Although, in that regard, I've actually heard, there's kind of been a resurgence that's the most recent season I've been hearing a lot more praise for.
And even things like South Park. I know there was a period where South Park seemed less relevant, but it sounded like there was a period where South Park was actually in like the mid 2010s, where South Park was actually had a quality resurgence, and people seemed more interested in people. It seemed to have better quality. People enjoyed it more.
Mm-hmm. All right, but again, thank you for joining me. And
thanks.
If you once again want to tell people where else you can be found online.
Everybody knows that a Lackey lives in a hole in the ground. I have right now my main gig podcasting wise is from Inner Time, which is a Doctor Who podcast, which you can find at Rabbit Hole Podcast, where you found this. The new season of Doctor Who is sounds like it's more or less confirmed that it will be premiering on April 12th. So I assume sometime in May.
I believe that should be right around when this episode drops.
Wow. So I'm assuming that probably late April, early May, Jason and I will start doing From Inner Time again.
Yeah, and as always, you can find me on social media everywhere where I'm at Bubbawheat. The best place to find me where I'm most active, if you want to hear, what else I'm watching at the moment, Threads is the best place to find that. But I'm still out there on all the other ones. So if you send me a message or at me, as long as you say something nice, I'll most likely respond. And this show, we also have a Facebook group. It's Time to Rewind, a time loop group. And you can discuss episodes as they come out and be informed of what is upcoming for later seasons of this show. And until next time, smoke me a kipper, and I'll regenerate before breakfast next week.